So if you really want to do HDR work, you like the way it looks, I recommend investing in a program called Photomatix. So let's just do a search. You can download a trial version for free. You put Photo, P-H-O-T-O, Matix, M-A-T-I-X, in Google. It'll come right up. Here's the website, www.hdrsoft.com. They have either an Essentials version, which I haven't tried, or a Photomatix Pro, which is what I have. You can download it for free. The free version works just like the full version, except it's going to put a watermark on your images. So go ahead and try downloading it and fooling with it if you want. See if you like it. You can turn in photos with the watermark. That's not a problem. If you want to come in and process a couple of photos without the watermark, let me know, and I'll bring my computer in and you can come in my office and you can work on them. As far as photo that you turn in, you can process it using either Photoshop or Photomatix. Okay, so I already have my version. I'm not going to download anything. Let me put up Photomatix. And I already have Bridge up from the last version. Now we don't have to use Bridge. We can load our bracketed photos by just going and finding them on the computer with our browse function, and that works fine. But we can also load them from Bridge. I have to close this out to make this smaller. So I have Bridge up already, and I've got the 3 class photos that I use. So let me just make Bridge a little smaller so I can move stuff over. So here's my 3 class photos. Hit load bracketed photos, and I can just drag them over. So either way works. Put it up full size again. All right, hit OK, and you'll get a processing options box. I've read that you should do something that's done on a tripod by correcting the horizontal and vertical shifts. If you handheld, which I did not handhold with the photos that you're using, you should do it by matching features. I've actually found that the matching features works quite well. And then I can leave it as my default and use it whether or not I handheld my photos. So I leave mine set up by matching features. This is just kind of the default with the shift. There's probably not much ghosting in this, but there may be some with leaves and stuff like that, so I have it automatically remove ghosts. If you do people or moving subjects, you're going to have a lot of issues with ghosting, and HDR, quite frankly, might not work that well for those types of images. If you've got a particular problem spot, you might want to use the selective tool, but usually I use the automatic and it works just fine. The default is for Photomatix to remove noise on underexposed and normally exposed photos. I just usually leave that set at the default. I don't necessarily have any issues with noise, but I don't think it's going to deteriorate the quality of my photos very much. And this just makes some lens corrections, which is not a bad thing. So I'm going to hit OK on that. It takes a little while before it loads things and processes. Let's make it full size while it's doing it. And I will cut some of this out on the video, so it'll take longer on your computer than it looks like it's taking here. Alright, so this is our image, but it hasn't applied any of its effects to it yet. You could actually save this at this point if you wanted to be able to come back, open this photo, and try some different effects on it. So let's do that. And you'll see it has its own HDR format. So we'll call it our intermediate HDR image. And save it as the HDR format. Okay, now what you want to click on is this tone mapping Infusion. And it'll just go to whatever I used last. So what you're probably going to start out and it'll be on this default if you haven't used Photomatix before. Gives you a histogram up in here if you want to see it. You can drag that around. I like to kind of get it out of the way because I'm doing this based on my eyes rather than really looking too much at the histogram. Kind of want to cycle through and look at your images. I like the way the photographic looks on this one. Natural looks pretty nice, but it gives me a little less color. But remember, you can always mess with your color later. Painterly can give you some really cool effects. If you want an image that really looks HDR, try some of the Painterly effects. With this particular image, I'm not liking what it's doing to my sky, but we might be able to correct that. Sometimes I do have trouble correcting for that, though. And just go through and see, it's got a lot more different settings. This Painterly 5 actually used an exposure fusion, which is a little bit different. But I like what that did because it didn't give me those kind of crunchy, overdone effects on the sky. So that might be one to start out with. An exposure fusion is using a little different type of processing. Surreal gives you some kind of cool effects. And overdone, but sometimes you want that. I really like the way that image looks, for example. Now it does look like a painting, but maybe we'll process it that way. You start going down here, you get some more realistic looking type of things. And if you want a nice soft look to your picture, which looks nice sometimes, you might want to go down here. You get down in these, you get some black and white effects, and it's got much better black and white effects, I think, than Photoshop did. I like black and white effects with snow pictures sometimes. You can see these give it kind of an old picture look. And then when you get down into here, it's going into the exposure fusion modes again, which I can like them a lot if I want to go with a little more natural looking picture. I do like that look. Now, if you like a particular look after you've fooled with it, because once you get a look you like, you can fool with it some and say, well, I want this to be a little more saturated. Maybe I want to turn down my strength a little bit or turn up my strength a little bit. And if you get a look that you like, you can actually save your preset. So you can come down here, click, and save your preset. And this is an exposure fusion one. And a lot of times I'll just name it based on the picture I was working with. Fall. I'll know I did it for fall colors. And we can see I've got a list of presets that I've saved. That one didn't come up and load yet, but it will next time. Alright, so I'm going to give this, I think, one of the more extreme effects. I do like that. Surreal 2 is just a little bit darker. Looks a little more painting-like. I don't usually process my photos with a painting-like feel. I like to get them looking a little bit photographic. So this isn't a set I use most of the time. But since I've already done this with a photographic look to it, I'm going to process it with this surreal look. And maybe I can mess with this stuff a little bit. I think my shadows are maybe a little too dark. Yeah, brighten them up a little bit. I like that better. And you can fool with some of this other stuff. So look at what happens if we move the strength over. And had it all the way up. I think I'm going to leave it there. Once you get a look that you like with this, you process it. Once it's processed, it'll let you do some other post-processing, and that's great. You can use this to post-process if you don't have Photoshop or Lightroom. But if I do have Photoshop or Lightroom, I usually like to save my photo as is. And you notice it gives you sharpening tools and everything. So Photomatix lets you adjust saturation of individual colors. Maybe I'll bring my blue up a little bit and see if I can get a little more out of the sky. So it does some of the same things that you can do in Lightroom, or I'll leave it alone. It didn't look like it was bringing up enough, so I'll use my graduated filter on this And with these changes, I might not get as blue a sky as I want. I'm going to click Done, and I'm going to save my image. And we'll call this Photomatix. Close this out. Okay, so back at Bridge. And I want to look at our Photoshop photo, our original, and our Photomatix one. They're not together. So I'm going to hit the Control key and highlight the ones I want to look at. There's the correct exposure. Okay, and I'm going to hit the space key now to look at them in full screen. So there's our Photoshop one. There's our Photomatix one, which I haven't fooled with yet. And here's our original. So again, I did a fairly overdone version on Photomatix, which you wouldn't necessarily have to do it that way. You could make it look more like this. I'll hit the space key again. And I'm going to work on the Photomatix one in Adobe Camera Raw. I'm going to skip over the post-processing techniques I've used for Photomatix, and we'll get to the final images. You can check out the post-processing techniques I use for the Photoshop HDR image and apply them to your image. Hopefully you're going to be doing some of your own shots if you've gotten this far in the lecture. Okay, let's look at the ones that we fooled with and compare it to the original. So we had the HDR for class, which we processed in Photoshop and Adobe Camera Raw. We had the TIFF, which was just processed in Adobe Camera Raw, so let's look at that one. We have the Photomatix HDR TIFF, which was just processed in Camera Raw. So let's click on HDR for class, the PSD version, the TIFF version, the Photomatix one, and the Photomatix TIFF. And let's compare them to the correct exposure. So now when I hit the space, it's going to just cycle through those pictures. There's our Photoshop version. There's our Photoshop version before we processed it in Photoshop. Again, I definitely like the Photoshop, the extra processing we did in Photoshop better. There's our Photomatix. And my tastes in HDR tend to be towards the more natural, like the Photoshop one I did. But we could have done a more natural version using Photomatix. I just wanted to show you a more extreme version. There's the one we processed in Photoshop. And there's the one that we just processed in Adobe Camera Raw. And there's not as much of a difference because I did my sharpening in Adobe Camera Raw. But you can see we've added a little bit of saturation to the scene. Okay, so I think I've given you a really powerful tool that'll let you take some really awesome and different images and let them stand out compared to the average photo that everyone takes every day. So have some fun fooling with this.